Barefoot, emaciated, with hair hacked off by a knife, she whispered, "The basement was only the beginning." 15 years after she vanished, the missing girl returned, and everything she revealed turned the case upside down. But first, let's go back to the very beginning. The town of Marion Springs, Ohio, had always prided itself on its safety, the kind of place where porch lights stayed on all night more out of habit than fear. Church bells rang on Sundays, and teachers still remembered your parents' report cards. But in the fall of 2009, something broke in the marrow of that peace. It began with Amy Crawford, a quiet, observant senior with a love of harmonies and composition notebooks filled with unfinished lyrics. On October 3rd, after choir practice ended at 5:15 p.m., Amy stepped into the early dusk and vanished. Her coat was found folded on the church steps the next morning. Her phone lay dead in a storm drain 2 blocks away. There were no screams, no signs of struggle, no answers. 2 months passed. Then, 16-year-old Vanessa Reyes failed to return from babysitting for a family she'd worked with for over a year. The mother returned home at 10:37 p.m. to find her infant asleep, the house locked, and no trace of Vanessa. Her backpack and jacket were discovered inside. Her shoes were still by the front door. The porch camera, newly installed the week prior, had been disconnected. Wires clipped, not yanked. The final disappearance came in January. Madison Grant, a varsity track athlete with a fierce wit and a scholarship to Ohio State, went for a morning jog and never returned. Her Fitbit uploaded a partial route, ending abruptly at the edge of Franklin Woods, where a footpath led into an undeveloped lot. Detectives found a single shoelace there, frayed at the tip. Dogs caught her scent, but lost it near a gravel road. Marion Springs buckled under the weight of mounting terror. Parents no longer let their daughters out after dark. Neighborhood watches ballooned overnight. But the fear curdled into frustration as each search ended the same. Nothing. No witnesses, no ransom notes, no bodies. As time passed, the town's collective attention frayed. Conspiracies flared and died on online forums. The police chief took early retirement. The local paper stopped running the girls' photos on the front page. But the parents did not forget. Amy's mother, Ellen, passed out flyers every week until arthritis overtook her fingers. Vanessa's father drove 600 miles chasing a Craigslist tip that led to nothing but heartbreak. Madison's older brother once broke into a shuttered meatpacking plant with a flashlight and a baseball bat, convinced he'd find her inside. For 15 years, the silence was absolute. Until February 14th, 2024. A woman staggered barefoot into the flickering neon of a Marathon gas station in Dayton. Her clothes hung off her like she'd been underwater. Her fingernails were cracked, hair hacked short. The clerk who called 911 said she looked feral, like she'd crawled out of the earth itself. The paramedics tried to question her, but she only stared at the floor, trembling. Then, with a voice made of rust and fear, she said, "The basement wasn't even the beginning." And suddenly, Marion Springs wasn't safe anymore. It never had been. The house was ordinary. Red brick, single story, a patchy yard swallowed by winter's frost. The kind of home you'd pass on the edge of town without a second glance, set back just enough from the road to be invisible unless you were looking. But the moment the FBI breached the front door, something felt wrong. Not visibly, not at first. The air had a stillness, no dust, no clutter. Everything placed too carefully, like a model of how a home should look. The basement door was in the kitchen floor, hidden beneath a rolling rug and a heavy table. Amy had drawn the layout from memory, down to the 4 boards nailed unevenly along the frame. The agents pried it open and descended. What they found confirmed their worst expectations. The basement was soundproofed from ceiling to floor, lined with industrial padding beneath drywall. A twin cot, a steel toilet, and restraints anchored to the wall. Thick leather cuffs, a ring bolt overhead, a tripod mount pointed at the cot, camera missing. One chair, one locked freezer. But Amy told them this wasn't it. She pointed to the far corner behind the rusted furnace where concrete met concrete at an unnatural seam. The agents brought in ground-penetrating radar. Behind that wall, an empty cavity. They broke it open. A narrow stairwell, steep and jagged like it had been hand-carved, led down to something far worse. The air changed immediately. Thick, stale, metallic. The light from above barely touched the floor. Flashlights cut through a maze of poured concrete halls, each lined with doors made of reinforced plywood and heavy bolts. 3 rooms. In the first, a pile of clothes and a tattered journal with hearts drawn on the margins. Vanessa's. In the second, a half-eaten protein bar and fingernail scratches along the doorframe. The third was colder, larger. On the far wall, under a weak overhead bulb, were initials carved into the cinder block. MG, 2012. Still here. The agents froze. One of them turned away to retch. This place wasn't just built to contain. It was designed to erase. News leaked fast. By morning, media vans circled the block. 3 girls, long presumed dead, had been held for over a decade. But only one had emerged. Only Amy. The other 2 were still missing, their last signs of life reduced to initials and stains in concrete silence. And Amy, haunted, silent, hollow-eyed, wouldn't say another word. Not yet. Not until he appeared. The hospital TV hummed in the background, its picture soft with static, framed by the dull green of the recovery ward walls. Amy Crawford sat propped against 2 pillows, her wrists bandaged where the shackles had torn skin down to muscle. Her eyes didn't blink much. She hadn't spoken in 2 days. Nurses whispered that maybe she never would. Then came the press conference. It aired live on Channel 4, a formal backdrop, microphones, the seal of the Marion Springs Police Department behind the speaker. And in front of it, wearing a calm navy blazer and a grief-polished smile, stood Dr. Thomas Bell. We're all shaken by what Amy endured, but she's strong, resilient. She has a long road ahead, but with proper therapy and support, she'll heal. Amy's fingers twitched. The cadence of his voice wasn't just familiar, it was branded into her nightmares. The metronomic calm, the way he curled his lips just slightly at the end of each sentence, like punctuation only, he understood. He wasn't speaking to comfort anyone. He was narrating, controlling the story, just as he always had. The nurse beside her, mid-check of a saline line, noticed the change first. Amy's breathing sharpened. Her hand rose slowly, pointing at the screen with a kind of quiet violence. "That's him," she whispered. Her voice cracked like glass. "That's the man who locked us in." The nurse froze, wide-eyed, then bolted to the hallway. Less than a minute later, 2 federal agents pushed through the doors. Amy repeated herself, louder now, louder than she'd spoken in years. "That's him. He kept us under the house. For years. He told us the world forgot us. He said no one would believe girls like us." Until that moment, the FBI had built a profile around a loner. Someone antisocial, off the grid, a drifter or predator with no social roots. But Bell had been at every town fundraiser. He volunteered at schools, donated to shelters. He ran grief counseling for the parents of the missing girls. He sat across from the very people he was torturing. His second property, a farmhouse 30 miles outside town, had been listed under a holding company he created during his postdoctorate years, hidden in legal fog, just like the girls he'd buried from the world. Inside the hospital room, the energy changed. Amy had gone from victim to witness. The agents leaned in, pens out. The tone of the case shifted. For the first time since her rescue, Amy's voice didn't shake. "You think the basement was the worst part?" she asked. "It wasn't. The worst part was that he was the only person who made us feel like someone was still listening." And so, beneath the sterile fluorescence of room 214, the real unraveling began. Dr. Thomas Bell's trap wasn't made of chains or locks. Not at first. It was made of language, of comfort, of attention, weaponized with surgical precision. He knew the right tone of voice to use with broken homes, the right pauses to make girls feel like they were being heard for the first time. And in Marion Springs, he ran after-school programs under the banner of community outreach, volunteer mentorship for at-risk girls, free group counseling sessions, transportation assistance for working single mothers. He framed it as intervention, prevention, therapy, and the town, eager to believe in its own decency, applauded him for it. Vanessa Reyes had opened up to him during a group session. Her father drank himself into rages some nights, and her mother worked third shift to keep them afloat. Bell offered Vanessa extra one-on-one time. No charge. She felt seen, protected. Madison Grant was struggling with anxiety after a series of panic attacks affected her ability to run track. Bell offered to help her reframe the fear, called it cognitive reframing, taught her breathing techniques. It worked. Her confidence returned. She never noticed how many questions he asked about her morning routines. Amy, older and quieter, volunteered at his clinic for community service credit. She filed forms, cleaned exam rooms. She overheard his soft voice in therapy rooms behind half-closed doors, telling girls they mattered, that they were resilient, that they were safe. He studied them for months, noticed whose phones were old and lacked GPS, who was most isolated, who would not be immediately missed for hours or longer. When each girl woke, they were already underground. At first, the basement seemed like the endpoint. Cold walls, a metal cot, no windows, food at irregular intervals. But the true horror revealed itself with time. A narrow hallway behind a false wall led to a sprawling subterranean complex. Bell's depths. There, the torment was not physical brutality, but a perverse form of psychological experimentation. One girl would receive food, the others would not. He forced them into roles: victim, enabler, survivor, traitor, then swapped them, broke allegiances, planted lies, removed light for days, played their own screams back to them. "This isn't punishment," he would whisper through the vent. "This is therapy. You're getting better." And the worst part, Amy confessed, was that a part of her started to believe it, that in the darkness, Bell had become the only voice of order, the only constant. "He didn't just want us trapped," she said. "He wanted us reconstructed." In silence, in darkness, one decision at a time. By the middle of 2023, the order of captivity had begun to decay. Dr. Thomas Bell, once meticulous to the point of obsession, started to falter. His routines fractured. Cameras, once calibrated with surgical precision, were removed without explanation. Where meals used to arrive on exact timers, powdered eggs at 8 o'clock a.m., dry protein bars at 6 o'clock p.m., now came in irregular bursts or not at all. Sometimes 2 days would pass in silence. Sometimes he'd burst into the depths at 3 o'clock a.m., pacing, muttering, wearing a jacket as if prepared to flee but unable to follow through. Amy saw it first, the tiny cracks forming in his armor. Bell was unraveling, not loudly, but in the dangerous, quiet way that unstable men do. He became more controlling in strange ways, checking under fingernails for dirt, inspecting the cell corners for scratched messages. But at the same time, he grew less careful. His monologues were less composed, laced with paranoia about shadows on the stairwell and ungrateful specimens. He began speaking of an end phase. Amy began to prepare. She stopped resisting. She looked down when spoken to. She praised him when he spoke of his theories, nodding like a loyal student. She learned how to match his cadence, mimic his language, sow comfort where he once found conflict. Every broken routine was a signal, every gap an opening. For weeks, she studied the pattern of his new instability. It wasn't if he'd make a mistake. It was when. On January 28, 2024, it happened. He came down alone. No gloves, no clipboard, shirt half-buttoned, distracted. The hatch behind him remained ajar, just barely. He didn't notice the bent metal pipe Amy had stashed behind the water pail. When he turned his back, she didn't hesitate. She struck him once, hard, behind the ear. He dropped, stunned but not unconscious. She ran before she saw him move again. Blood trailed her up the stairs and out into the frozen air above. But when she returned with the FBI just hours later, led by flashlight and breathless memory, the second chamber was sealed. Not just locked, welded. No sign of recent tampering. Just dried blood pooled near a drainage grate and drag marks that led nowhere. Belle was gone. Vanessa and Madison were gone. And so, doubt returned. The investigators turned clinical, measured. Some asked if trauma had distorted Amy's sense of events. Her parents, graying, trembling, watched in silence as their daughter's story twisted under scrutiny. Had she been alone all this time? Then Amy produced the notebook. Water-stained, frayed, pages curling like burnt paper. Inside were dozens of drawings, elevation maps, duct routes, crude sketches of vents, corridors, a hatch beneath the eastern wall. Belle never patrolled. Labels in pencil, smeared from years of being hidden in her mattress lining. One corner had a single word circled in red. Escape. There were no more questions after that, only dread. Because Amy hadn't just escaped. She had outlasted the architect of hell, and she was not the only one who might still be alive. The map Amy had drawn, rough and faded from years of concealment, led investigators 3 miles beyond the known parameters of Belle's second property, to the rusted skeleton of an abandoned auto factory on the outskirts of Dayton. The structure had long since become a hollow monument to Midwestern decline, windows shattered, stairwells collapsed, graffiti peeling from cement walls bleached by time. Beneath it ran a forgotten web of storm drains and crawl spaces, outflows that once flushed wastewater and now stank of mildew and old rain. Navigating the tunnels required protective suits and portable generators. What the team discovered inside defied any assumption that Belle had acted impulsively or alone. Against one concrete wall were rusted steel brackets, each fitted with old leather restraints, some shredded, others still buckled shut. Strips of cloth, shredded thermals, and mold-eaten shoes were scattered across the floor like skin shed over time. Nearby, they found a wall layered in overlapping scratches, tally marks etched deep into the brick with nails or bone. Hundreds of them, some vertical, some slanted, some grouped in fives with no clear system. Days, meals, punishments? They didn't know, but they knew someone had survived there, someone who had counted something. That same night, detectives retrieved footage from a traffic camera mounted across the road from the factory. At 2:16 a.m. on January 28th, just hours after Amy's escape, a figure appeared in the lower corner of the frame. A woman, limping, barefoot, a blue raincoat draped over her like it had been stolen, not worn. Her arms clutched a black garbage bag close to her chest, as if it contained something more precious than clothes. The camera's resolution offered no facial clarity, only blurred motion. But her posture told another story. Amy watched the footage in a darkened FBI conference room. She didn't blink. Her jaw trembled once. Then, she leaned forward and said with certainty, "That's Madison. That's her walk. And she's favoring her left. He broke her right arm in 2013. It never healed right." The room fell silent. For the first time, agents stopped treating Amy's survival as the end of something. It was now clear this wasn't an isolated act of captivity. It was a system. But one name remained unspoken: Vanessa. No footage, no trail, no tally marks linked to her initials. And Belle, despite a nationwide alert, had disappeared completely. Amy sat with her back straight, voice low, almost academic. He didn't just want obedience or pain. That was surface level. He was collecting responses, reactions, variables. We weren't prisoners. She looked each agent in the eye. We were data points. And with that, the case changed shape. No longer a rescue, but the excavation of an experiment. One still incomplete, one possibly ongoing. The journal was discovered in early March, inside a climate-controlled storage locker in Cleveland, registered to a shell corporation. Bell had signed the lease with a false name and paid cash for years. Investigators nearly missed it, tipped off only by a recurring key code found in Amy's notebook and cross-referenced with tax record anomalies. The unit contained only 3 items: a black duffel bag, a box of unmarked VHS tapes, and the journal. Bound in soft brown leather, the book opened without resistance, its pages perfectly preserved. The handwriting was neat, careful, almost beautiful in its symmetry, like a physician's charts or a scientist's field notes. But what lived between the lines felt colder than any cell Amy had ever described. There were no emotional outbursts, no confessions, just observations, catalogued methodically. Amy Crawford, adaptive, emotionally agile, occasionally resistant but psychologically malleable when isolated from peer stimuli. Has demonstrated high retention during sleep cycle suggestion sessions, defiant behavior mitigated by targeted deprivation, recommended as control subject for long-term resilience metrics. Madison Grant. Displays instinctive leadership, resistant to social manipulation, emotional anchor for group cohesion, presents high risk for experiment disruption, requires further destabilization or removal from shared environments. Close surveillance advised. Vanessa Reyes. Emotional sensitivity created early compliance, reached peak vulnerability and usefulness by Q1 2015. Loss of function due to depressive spiral, considering removal, potential as post-mortem metric for grief transference on remaining subjects. The agents read in silence. Some stopped midway, left the room, came back with hands shaking. Others stayed stoic, marking passages with post-its as if dissecting a case study in predation. Nowhere in the journal did Bell use the word victim. He never referred to them as girls, only subjects, variables, datasets. He charted their hunger response patterns, measuring how long each would cry before silence, when compliance peaked during starvation. How dreams shifted under synthetic melatonin and auditory suggestion. And then, beneath a line break, written without emphasis, but seared into every reader's mind. The experiment ends when they either escape or evolve. Amy was in the room when they read it to her. At first, she was still. Then her shoulders folded in on themselves. Her voice was barely audible, as if speaking to a memory that still had weight in her bones. "Vanessa didn't evolve fast enough," she said. "So he ended her." No one spoke after that. What the journal revealed wasn't madness. It wasn't sadism. It was a theory, executed with unflinching detachment, a test built from flesh and time, in which suffering wasn't the point. It was the control variable. The security camera above the trauma shelter's entryway caught the moment in grainy black and white. April 19th, 2024. 9:42 a.m. A woman approached from the east, walking like each step carried an argument with gravity. Her coat, oversized, stained, flapped around her like she had found it on a fence post. Bare ankles, no shoes. Her hair was chopped unevenly, as if cut with a trembling hand and no mirror. Her face was thin, almost skeletal, but not beyond recognition. Not to someone who knew. She reached the front door and knocked once. Not urgently, not loudly. A knock that expected nothing. When the staff member opened it, the woman didn't cry, didn't collapse, didn't even ask for food or safety. She said only, "Is Amy here?" In a nearby room, Amy Crawford froze when the receptionist relayed the message. She walked, then ran, down the hallway, hospital bracelet still wrapped around her wrist. The two women met under the flickering fluorescent lights of the intake corridor, in a silence no one dared interrupt. Amy stopped, arms trembling, eyes wide and filling. Madison stood frozen, lips parted like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then they moved. No words, just arms locking, heads buried into each other's shoulders, ribs pressing against ribs like they were checking to make sure the other was still real, still alive. The camera caught it all. The moment survivors found each other not in a courtroom or a morgue, but in the dingy hallway of a shelter built for broken things. Madison had escaped 6 days before Amy, but hadn't surfaced. She'd lived in an alley, fed off vending machines, slept behind dumpsters. She thought it was a test, a trick. Bell had trained them not to believe in rescue, not to believe in freedom. He had taught them that any comfort was manipulation, any door, a loop back into the maze. She only came forward when a newspaper headline found its way into the alley where she slept. Amy Crawford found alive. That broke something. Or maybe it rebuilt something. Bell was still gone. No digital footprint, no confirmed sightings, no prints recovered from the second site. Only silence. His final experiment still breathing in the world, recording its own variables. But Amy and Madison were done being subjects. Under federal protection, they began writing. Not a manifesto, not a plea, a document, a reckoning. Its working title, The Basement Wasn't Even the Beginning. Because it wasn't, not for what happened, not for what's coming next.